I was a financial analyst who could not follow her own advice. I wrote articles about this for the firm's client newsletter, for the personal finance blog that had accumulated a modest following over 3 years of consistent publishing. I wrote about compound interest and the specific, irreversible cost of delaying retirement contributions and the way small monthly decisions accumulate into lives. I wrote these things with the confidence of someone who understood the mathematics of money deeply and personally, and I sent them out into the world, and I went home to my 300-square-foot studio, where the air conditioning worked reliably for 3 months of the year, and ate the dinner I had been eating 4 nights a week for the better part of a decade. Ramen, prepared in the kitchen that was also the living room that was also the bedroom, in the apartment I had chosen not because it was what I wanted, but because it was what I could afford after the transfer. $3,000. Every month, for 8 years. I want to be precise about this because precision was the one thing I could hold onto in the period that came after I understood what I had actually been doing. Not giving, not supporting, not being a good daughter, which was the story I had been telling myself with the specific dedication of someone who needs a story badly enough to stop examining it. Funding. I had been funding a life I did not know existed, with money I did not know I was spending, on credit I did not know had been opened in my name. But that came later. The photograph came first. It was a Friday evening in October, and I was finishing a client portfolio analysis. The kind of work that required the complete attention that I had always been good at giving to other people's financial futures. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. My sister Sienna in the family group chat. A photograph. I almost did not look at it immediately. I was mid-calculation, and the group chat was mostly the ambient noise of a family that communicated in the way of people who are performing closeness, rather than practicing it. The forwarded jokes, the photographs of meals, the birthday acknowledgments that arrived on the right day with the reliability of automation. I finished the calculation and then opened the message. Mom's 60th at Oriole, best meal of my life. The photograph showed my parents and my sister at a restaurant table set with the particular deliberateness of a very expensive place. The crystal, the white linen, what appeared to be a 30-year scotch in my father's hand. I recognized Oriole. I had walked past it on Burnside many times. It was the kind of restaurant I looked at through the window the way you look at a foreign country, with interest and the understanding that it was not for you. Reservations booked 3 months out. Entrees starting at $75. The kind of place my parents had told me, many times and in many configurations of the same sentence, that they simply could not afford. I zoomed in. Not looking for anything specific, just looking, the way I looked at financial documents, the habit of detail. There was a receipt folder at the edge of the table, half visible, cracked open the way leather folders crack when they are set down quickly. And in the fold of it, just the top edge visible, a credit card. I zoomed further. The name on the card was mine. I sat at my desk for a moment with the photograph open on my phone. The office was empty by then. It was past 7, and the particular quiet of an office after hours had settled in, the hum of the HVAC and nothing else. I opened my credit monitoring application, the one I recommended to every client, the one I checked with the anxious regularity of someone who understood, professionally, that credit was the infrastructure of a financial life. There was a new alert. Oriole Restaurant, Portland, OR. $1,847.32. Account, Discover card ending in 4472. Cardholder, Mila J. Parker. I had never opened a Discover card. I pulled my full credit report with the specific, deliberate calm of someone performing a task they understand how to perform, while some other part of them is doing something else entirely. The report loaded. I read it the way I read financial documents, sequentially, without skipping, allowing each line to mean what it meant before moving to the next. 4 credit cards, a personal loan. Accounts opened between 4 and 7 years ago, all bearing my name and social security number and date of birth, all carrying balances that together totaled $437,554. Utilization rates above 90% on every card. A credit score of 581, which explained the apartment application that had been rejected the previous year. The one I had attributed to a reporting error and disputed and eventually given up on. The auto loan application that had come back denied, which I had not made. The Lexus in my parents' driveway was a 2023 model. My colleague James had admired it in the parking lot once when my father had stopped by the office. My father, who had told me he had lost his job 8 years ago. My father, whose unemployment I had been supplementing for 8 years with $3,000 a month because I had believed, completely and without examination, that he could not afford a car. James found me at my desk at 11 o'clock. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. I turned my laptop toward him without speaking. He scanned the screen. I watched his face change in the specific way faces change when they encounter something that is both impossible and plainly documented. "That's your name," he said. "I never opened those accounts." He sat down in the chair across from my desk. "This isn't a mistake." "No." We stayed until 2 in the morning. James was methodical in the way of someone who builds arguments for a living. He had been in compliance before he moved to analysis, and the skill of it was still there. The ability to construct a sequence from disparate data points that was airtight rather than merely suggestive. He built the timeline in a spreadsheet. Every transfer I had made, every emergency my parents had reported, every charge on the fraudulent accounts in the days immediately following each transfer. The pattern was mathematical. Each month, crisis reported, money transferred, charges appearing within 72 hours. The minimum payments on the credit cards paid from the same account I deposited into. They had been using my transfers to service the minimum payments on debt they had created in my name. The system was circular and self-funding and had been running for the better part of a decade. "This is felony fraud," James said quietly when we had laid out the last of it. "This is not family drama. This is a crime." I looked at the spreadsheet. 40 pages of documentation organized into columns with headers I had written myself. "I know," I said. I drove home at 2:15 in the morning through streets that were empty in the specific way of a city at its quietest, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my studio complex for a while before going inside. The ramen I had planned for dinner was still on the counter. I had left in the morning with the vague intention of a slightly better week. I had been promoted 2 months earlier, and the raise had created, briefly, the sensation that something was about to become possible, and I stood in my kitchen with my coat still on and looked at the packet of noodles and thought about 8 years. Then I went to bed. Not to sleep exactly, but to lie in the dark and let the full weight of what I had found settle into me without doing anything about it yet. There was time. I needed to think before I acted, and I needed to think clearly, and I could not think clearly at 2:30 in the morning after the night I had just had. The thinking took 3 weeks. I want to account for those 3 weeks honestly, because the story of what happened at Thanksgiving is not interesting if you skip the part where I sat with what I knew and felt every version of the thing before I decided what to do with it. My mother's name was Linda, and she had been beautiful her entire life in the way that shapes a personality. Not vanity, exactly, but a deep and genuine belief that the quality of a surface communicated the quality of what was underneath it. She kept an immaculate house. She dressed with care for ordinary Tuesdays. She sent birthday cards on the right day, handwritten in the good ink. She called it standards, which was the word she used for the set of convictions she had about how life should look, and she had transmitted those convictions to her daughters with the thoroughness of someone who believes that appearance is not separate from character, but is its most reliable expression. My father, Richard, was quieter. An engineer by training, a man who communicated most fluently through the practical management of things. The car he kept in perfect condition, the house repairs he handled himself, the finances he oversaw with the particular confidence of someone who has always been the one who handles the finances. He had a dry humor that emerged at unexpected angles, and a habit of listening that I had always found more reassuring than other people's talking. I had loved them in the uncomplicated way of a child who has not yet learned that love and clarity are different things. Sienna was 3 years older and had always occupied the specific category of person who makes a room easier to be in, vivid and warm and funny. The kind of person whose energy arrives before they do, and makes other people feel more alive. She had been our parents' social daughter, the one who got them invited to things, the one whose friends became their friends, the one whose milestones they photographed and framed and discussed with the warmth of people narrating a story they were proud to be in. I had been the responsible one. I want to be precise about what that meant, because responsible sounds like a compliment, and in some ways it was one, but it also meant something else. It meant that my parents' attention had always had somewhere else to go. I was fine. I was handling it. I did not require the management that Sienna required, the gentle steering and the social scaffolding and the careful attention to her mood and her confidence and her sense of herself. I was the one who came home with good grades without being asked, the one who managed her own logistics, the one who, when things went sideways, found a way to correct them without making it anyone else's problem. Being fine became, over time, a kind of identity. And like all identities, it had a cost that I did not begin to calculate until it was already paid. The phone call had come on a Tuesday evening in April, 8 years ago. I had been 24, recently promoted, sitting in the studio apartment I had rented at the edge of what I could afford on my new salary, eating takeout that was a small celebration of the thing that had just happened to my life. The promotion felt like arrival, like the beginning of something I had been working toward. My mother's voice on the phone had the quality she used for things she had been preparing to say. Careful, measured. The breath that came at the beginning of a sentence she had rehearsed. Your father's company is downsizing, honey. They're letting him go. A pause. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. We might lose the house. I was already pulling up my banking application. This is what the responsible one did, she assessed, and she solved, and she did not make it about herself, because that was not what the responsible one did. How much do you need? Oh, sweetheart, I can't ask you to. Mom, how much? 2,000 would help with the mortgage, but the utilities are overdue and your father's medication. She let the silence do the work that the words did not need to do. I had heard that silence my entire life. I understood what it meant. I can do 3,000, I said, this month and next, until Dad finds something new. Mila, you're such a blessing. I transferred the money that night and felt something that I would spend the next 3 weeks after the photograph trying to account for honestly. Not virtue, not sacrifice. Something simpler and less flattering. Relief. The relief of being needed in the way I understood how to be needed. The relief of having a use that was legible and immediate, and that did not require me to navigate the more complicated terrain of being known. I was good at being helpful. I had been good at it since I was 7 years old. Being helpful was the version of love I had learned to speak fluently, because it was the version that had always been received. Month 2, emergency roof repair. Month 3, the water heater. Month 4, my father's car transmission. He needed it for job interviews, my mother said, and I had heard the specific urgency in her voice that I recognized as real, and that I did not question because questioning would have meant examining what I was doing, and I was not ready to examine it. Month 5, medical tests. Month 6, a specialist. 12 months became 24, became 48, became 96. I kept living the way I was living because the math only worked that way. The studio, the ramen, the accumulated vacation days that expired before I used them. The retirement account I had barely touched because the monthly surplus that should have been building toward something was going somewhere else. I turned down a promotion in 2019 because it would have required relocating, and relocating would have meant disrupting the transfer mechanism, and disrupting the transfer mechanism might have meant. I did not finish the thought at the time. I understand it now. My colleague James mentioned once in passing that he had seen my parents at a restaurant downtown. Upscale, he said. Must have been a special occasion. Must have been, I agreed. They deserved to celebrate, after everything they had been through. He gave me an odd look but did not push. What I remember most, from the 3 weeks between the photograph and Thanksgiving, was not anger. Anger came, certainly, not the explosive kind but the sustained kind. The low, steady heat of it that I would wake up with and carry through the day and set down at night without it having gone anywhere. What I remember most is the grief, the specific grief of understanding that the love had been real, my love for them, the love I had been acting from for 8 years. And that real love can be used by people who know what it looks like and know where the lever is. My parents knew exactly where my lever was. They had installed it. I called my mother on a Saturday morning, 10 days after the photograph. I had spent those 10 days building the documentation with James, not because I needed more evidence, the credit report was evidence enough, but because I needed to understand the full shape of what had happened before I had the conversation. I needed to know what I was actually looking at. The 40 pages of organized documentation were not a weapon I was sharpening. They were a map of a territory I had been living in without knowing it, and I needed to see the whole of it before I could figure out where I was. James had found the employment records on the third evening. My father had not been laid off 8 years ago. He had taken early retirement, voluntarily, with a full pension. A decision that made complete financial sense on its own terms, and that had nothing to do with the story my mother had told me on a Tuesday evening in April, when I was 24 and newly promoted, and eating takeout as a small celebration. I sat with that for a long time before I picked up the phone. "Hi, honey," my mother said. "How's your—" "I need you to explain the credit cards in my name." The silence that followed was a different quality from the silences I was used to from her. Not the practiced pause before an emotional line. Something else. Something that did not have a rehearsed next sentence behind it. "What credit cards?" she said finally. "All 4 of them. And the personal loan." I kept my voice even in the way I kept my voice even when I was presenting difficult financial news to a client, not cold, just professional. "I have the statements. I saw the card at Oriole. Your birthday, my name on the card." Another pause. And then something shifted in her voice that I had not expected. Not tears, not denial, but a kind of flattening, as if she had reached the decision that the performance was finished. "Oh," she said. "That." What followed was not an apology. It was a justification, the specific justification of someone who has had years to construct a version of events in which what they did made sense. They had been desperate. The bills had been real in the beginning. The $3,000 a month had not been enough. They had needed to maintain appearances, for Sienna's sake, for the family's reputation, for the life they had built and could not afford to visibly lose. "And the $3,000 every month was covering the minimum payments," I said, "on the debt you created in my name. We needed the money to stay current. You needed the money you were stealing from me to cover the debt you were creating while you stole it. Don't you dare use that language. Mom." My voice was very quiet. "I'm going to ask you once whether Sienna knew." The pause that followed was its own answer. "She used the cards sometimes, when we needed her too." I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time afterward. The ramen packet was on the counter. It was 11 in the morning on a Saturday, and I had not yet eaten, and I was looking at the ramen packet and thinking about the specific arithmetic of it, not the dollars and cents. I had done enough of that, but the arithmetic of a life. The vacations I had not taken. The apartment I had been denied. The retirement account that was a decade behind where it should have been. The relationships I had managed carefully around the financial constraint I had believed was simply the reality of being a good daughter. I thought about my father's pension. I thought about his voluntary retirement, chosen freely on his own timeline, while I was working 2 jobs. I thought about the last Sunday dinner I had attended, 6 weeks before the photograph, where my mother had touched the sleeve of my blouse and said, "You look tired, honey. You work too hard." And I had said I'm fine, which was the thing I always said, and she had accepted it with the ease of someone who needed the answer to be fine and knew I could be counted on to provide it. I called James. "I'm going to the police," I said, a pause. "When?" "This week. I want everything ready before Thanksgiving." "Ivy, Mila, are you sure once you file there's no—" "I know," I said. "I've been sure for 10 days. I just needed to see it completely first." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll come with you. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm going to." We went on a Friday. Detective Sarah Morrison had the particular quality of someone who has spent a career handling cases that are painful in the specific way of things that should have been different and were not. She reviewed the 40 pages without rushing. She asked questions that were precise and without drama, the questions of someone building a case rather than performing reaction. "Your parents forged your signature on the original applications," she said, at the end. We can verify that with the comparison documents you've provided. Yes, and your sister made 47 transactions on accounts bearing your name. Yes, she looked at me steadily. Most people in family fraud cases don't want to press charges. I know. This becomes public record, she said. Arraignment, court dates, your parents could see significant prison time. I understand, she nodded. There was something in her expression that was not quite approval and not quite sympathy, but was something in between. The look of someone who has seen many versions of this situation and recognizes when a person has made a clear-eyed decision rather than an impulsive one. I'll have the case number ready Monday, she said. Outside on the street, James and I walked to the car in the particular quiet of two people who have just done something that cannot be undone. Thanksgiving is in 2 weeks, I said. He looked at me. They're hosting 50 people, I said. Family, people who have known us my entire life. People who have been told for 8 years that I am the ungrateful daughter, the selfish one, the one who doesn't give back. He was quiet for a moment. You're going to tell them. I'm going to tell them, I said. Not to destroy anyone, not for revenge. I thought about how to say it precisely. For the same reason I filed the police report. Because the truth has been hidden for a very long time, and I am done being the person who hides it. He nodded slowly. He did not try to talk me out of it, which was one of the reasons he was the person I had called the night everything changed. The house was the same house. That was the thing that struck me as I pulled into the driveway on a Thursday afternoon in late November, not the colonial architecture or the fresh landscaping or the cars in the driveway, all of them newer than they should have been, but the simple fact of its sameness. I had grown up in this house. I had come home to this house for 32 years of Thanksgivings, carrying dishes and wine and the accumulated noise of someone trying to be a good daughter, and the house had always looked exactly like this. Warm-lit, well-kept, the wreath on the door that my mother changed with the seasons. It had never occurred to me to ask what it cost. I sat in my car for a moment. The cream envelope was in my bag. Case number, official seal, the documentation in the careful order I had assembled it. I was wearing the good blazer, not the expensive one I had never been able to justify, but the one I had bought on sale 3 years ago and kept in rotation because it was the closest I had come. I looked at the house through my windshield, and I thought about my mother's voice on that first Tuesday evening 8 years ago, the practiced break in it, the silence she had let do the work. I thought about the relief I had felt when I transferred the money, the way it had felt like love, the way I had needed it to be love. I got out of the car. Inside was the particular organized chaos of a large family gathering 50 people in a house that held 50 people comfortably if everyone was pleasant and considerably less comfortably if they were not. Cousins and aunts and uncles and family friends who had been coming to this house since before I was born. The smell of the meal, which my mother made with the specific competence of someone who had been doing it for 30 years, and for whom it was both genuine pleasure and performance. My mother moved through the room with the ease of a host in full command of her occasion, touching shoulders, replenishing glasses, directing the flow of conversation with the invisible authority of someone who has always understood that managing the room is its own form of power. "Mila's here," her voice carried across the room when she saw me. The specific warmth of it, public warmth, the warmth of a mother displaying her daughter, landed in the way it always had, with the faint dissonance of something that was both real and performed simultaneously. I hugged people. I made small talk. I accepted a glass of wine and held it without drinking much and moved through the room in the way I had moved through family gatherings my entire life. Competently, pleasantly, without requiring anything from anyone. Sienna appeared at my elbow during the appetizers, close enough that her voice was below the room noise. "Don't start anything," she said. The warmth she had in public was entirely absent. In its place was something flat and alert, the look of someone who has been waiting for a specific threat and has decided to try to neutralize it in advance. I looked at her, my sister, 3 years older, the charming the one whose engagement ring caught the light from across the room, and whose upcoming 4 seasons wedding my parents had told me they were helping to fund with a savings account they had been building for years. I thought about the 47 transactions bearing my name and her signature. "I'm not starting anything," I said pleasantly. "I'm just here for Thanksgiving." She held my gaze for a moment, then moved away. Dinner was served at the long table that my mother only brought out for gatherings of this size. I found my place, always the same place, the reliable daughter at the reliable end of the table, and I sat down, and I watched my family eat my mother's cooking and drink wine that I could now identify as being paid for by my credit. My father's Rolex caught the light when he lifted his glass. My mother's earrings, new since the last time I had seen her, diamonds, small but real, caught it too. My father made the toast he always made at Thanksgiving, the one about gratitude and family, the one that had always landed warmly because he meant it, because the gratitude in it was genuine even if the means of its expression was not. I let the dinner move at its own pace. I ate. I answered questions when addressed. I watched the room the way I had always been good at watching things, patiently, with the full attention of someone who understands that the important information is often in what is not being said. It was my mother who created the opening, as I had expected she would, because she had been creating these openings at family gatherings my entire life. The moment where the room was full, and the champagne was warm, and the evening had reached its most generous atmosphere, and she would stand and say something that positioned her exactly where she wanted to be positioned in the story everyone present was going to carry away. She tapped her glass with a spoon. The crystal rang. The room quieted. "Before we finish," she said, "I want to say something." The practiced warmth was at its highest register. This was my mother at full capacity, the version of herself she had been building toward all evening. "I'm so grateful we could all be together. We've been through difficult times as a family, but we support each other." She looked at me. Directly, deliberately, the look of someone who has identified her subject and is addressing it. Some of us understand what sacrifice means. Some of us have always put family first. The room was warm and nodding, and I watched the people I had grown up around receive this, and I understood what she was doing with the same clarity I had always understood her moves in rooms. She was cementing the story, in front of witnesses, while she still controlled the room's temperature. "Mila, honey," she said, softening into the register she used for requests she expected to receive, "we should talk about Sienna's wedding costs. We're stretched a bit thin and we thought—" I stood up. The room did not freeze immediately. It was a gradual thing. The conversations at the far end of the table continuing for a moment before they, too, registered the change in the room's attention. I did not perform the moment. I want to be honest about this because there was a version of it. The version I had imagined during the 3 weeks of preparation. That was theatrical, that had speeches and confrontations, and the kind of drama that requires an audience to give it shape. What actually happened was quieter. I stood up and the room looked at me and I spoke in the voice I used for financial presentations. Clear, measured, calibrated to be heard without being raised. "I'd like to say something about the family finances," I said. My mother's expression shifted. The warmth remained on the surface, but something underneath it moved. The first small recalibration of a person who has realized the room is not going to go where she had arranged for it to go. "I've been sending my parents $3,000 a month for 8 years, I said. $288,000 total, because they told me they were struggling, that they might lose this house. I looked around the table. 50 faces in various arrangements of confusion and discomfort. My Aunt Carol, who had known me since birth. My Uncle Mike, who had given me my first book about money when I was 12. My cousins and the family friends, and the people who had been receiving my mother's version of my family's story at gatherings like this one for 8 years. A few weeks ago, I pulled my credit report. I found 4 credit cards and a personal loan opened in my name without my knowledge. Total balance, $437,000. The charges tell a story: restaurants, first-class flights, hotel stays, department stores, everything a family that is not struggling uses money for. The table was very quiet. "I also found that my father did not lose his job 8 years ago," I said. "He took voluntary early retirement with a full pension, on his own timeline. While I was working 2 jobs and living in a 300-square-foot apartment eating ramen 4 nights a week, because it was all I could afford after the transfer. My mother stood. "Mila, this is not the time." "Mom," I did not raise my voice. "You just told this room that some of us understand sacrifice. I want them to understand what the sacrifice was." I took the envelope from my bag and set it on the table. Not dramatically, simply placed it there, the cream envelope with the official seal, in the center of the table where everyone could see it. "I filed a police report 3 weeks ago," I said. "Identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, forgery. The case is active. The detective tells me arraignment is likely within 30 days. I looked at my parents, then at Sienna. "Charges have been filed against all 3 of you." My mother's sob came then, the genuine kind, not the practiced kind. I had known her long enough to hear the difference. "You called the police on your own parents," she said. "You committed 8 years of felonies against your own daughter," I said. "I reported the crime. Those are the accurate descriptions of what happened." My father had not spoken. He was sitting very still at his end of the table with the specific stillness of a man who has understood, fully, and without remaining hope of revision, that something is over. He was not the villain of my childhood. That was the thing I had to keep returning to in the weeks afterward. He was not the villain of my childhood. He was a man who had made a catastrophic series of choices and had made them again every month for 8 years, and the choices were not separable from who he was, but neither were they the whole of him, and holding both of those things simultaneously was the hardest work of the months that followed. "I'm not here to ruin a holiday," I said to the room. "I'm here because this family has been told a story about me for 8 years, that I don't give back, that I don't sacrifice, that I don't understand what family means." I picked up my bag. "Now you know the actual story. What you do with it is yours." I walked to the door. My cousin Jenny reached out and touched my arm as I passed, not speaking, just present, a small contact in the middle of a room that was reorganizing itself around a truth it had not been prepared for. I acknowledged it and kept walking. Outside, the November air was clean and cold in the specific way of that month, the particular cold that had not yet become the heavy cold of deep winter. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway and looked at the house. The warm-lit windows, the wreath on the door, my father's Lexus parked neatly beside my mother's car. And I felt several things simultaneously that I would spend months untangling from each other. Grief, clarity, something that was not quite relief and not quite not relief. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy and has finally set it down and discovered that they are more tired than they had known. I started the car. I drove home. The legal process moved with the specific, impersonal efficiency of institutions that deal regularly in human catastrophe. Diane Ryland, who James had recommended with the specific confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was recommending, reviewed the documentation in our first meeting with the focused attention of someone who found the case interesting rather than merely serviceable. "The evidence is exceptional," she said. "You documented this with the thoroughness of someone who understands financial records. I'm a financial analyst. It shows." She turned a page. "The forged signatures are verifiable against your authentic ones. The pattern of charges relative to your transfers creates a timeline that will be difficult to contest." She looked up. "Are you prepared for this to be a long process?" "I've been patient for 8 years," I said. "I can be patient for this." She nodded, the nod of someone who has heard versions of this sentence before and is assessing whether this version is the real kind. "Grand jury indictment within 60 days, likely. Arraignment to follow. The restitution claim is strong. I believe we can recover the full amount." "That's not the primary thing," I said. She looked at me. "The primary thing is that it's documented, officially, in a record that exists independent of anyone's version of the story." I thought about how to say it precisely. "I don't need the money back as much as I need the truth to be somewhere other than just my knowledge of it." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we proceed," she said. "My father called on a Sunday morning in December, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I had been expecting the call in the way you expect, whether not knowing the specific day, understanding the direction. I answered because I had decided I would answer once. Not to be persuaded and not to perform forgiveness, but because he was my father and I had loved him for 32 years, and some part of me needed to hear what he sounded like when the performance was completely gone. "Mila," he said, Dad! The silence that followed was not his usual silence, the comfortable, thoughtful pause of a man who chose his words because he understood their weight. This was the silence of someone who has lost the words and is trying to find them in unfamiliar territory. I didn't, he started, stopped. There's nothing I can say that changes what happened. No, I said. I want to say it anyway. Not because it helps, because it's true and you deserve to hear it said. His voice had the quality of something that has had everything performative stripped from it, leaving just the plain material of the thing. I knew what your mother was doing before I should have stopped it. By the time I fully understood the shape of it, we had been living inside it for years, and I told myself that stopping it would mean. He paused. That's not a reason. That's an explanation. They're different things. I know the difference, I said. Yes, he said. I know you do. A long pause. The pension, I should have told you about the pension. The first month. Before any of the rest of it happened. I held the phone and looked out my kitchen window at the December street. My studio had a window that faced the parking lot, which was not much of a view, but in certain lights it was its own kind of honest. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because your mother had already started the story, he said, and because I was afraid of what it would cost to stop it, which is cowardice. I want to name it correctly. I sat with that. My father naming his own cowardice without being asked to and without softening it. I know you're pressing charges, he said. I'm not calling to ask you not to. I wouldn't ask that. Good, I said. I'm calling because I needed you to know that I know. What was done and what it cost. Not as a strategy. Just because you're my daughter and you're owed the truth even if the truth comes too late to do anything useful. I did not say it was all right. It was not all right. But I sat on the phone with my father for another 10 minutes in the plain, quiet way of two people who have known each other a long time and are trying to figure out what knowing each other means now. And when we hung up, I stayed at my kitchen table for a while with the December light coming through the window and thought about what he had said. Cowardice, named precisely, not explained away. I did not forgive him that morning, but I filed the conversation in a different place than the rest of what I had been carrying, and that difference mattered in ways I would only understand later. The indictment came in January. The arraignment in February. My parents spent 72 hours in county jail after violating the conditions of their release. A call to my workplace that my lawyer documented and reported. A boundary crossed with the specific small defiance of people who had been crossing my boundaries for so long that they had stopped registering it as a choice. The plea deal came in late February. 18 months in prison, 10 years of probation, full restitution for both parents. Sienna, 6 months, 5 years probation, restitution for her portion. All 3, felony records. Permanent. In court, they had to say it out loud. That was the part I had not anticipated mattering as much as it did. Not the sentence, not the restitution order, not the official documentation I had been building toward for months. My mother's voice in the courtroom, flat and stripped of every register she had ever used to manage a room. I opened 4 credit cards in my daughter Mila Parker's name without her knowledge or permission. I used those cards for personal purchases totaling $437,000. I knew what I was doing was illegal. The words were recorded. They existed in a document that would outlast the courtroom, outlast the sentence, outlast every version of the story my mother had ever told. I drove home from the courthouse and made dinner and did not do anything dramatic with the evening. The drama was finished. What remained was the ordinary work of a life. James took me out the following weekend to celebrate in the way he approached most things. Without fanfare, with a meal he had actually thought about, at a restaurant in the Pearl District that was not Oriole but was genuinely good. And we talked about work and the novel he had been reading and his sister's new apartment in Chicago. And at the end of it, he said, "How are you actually?" "Actually," I said, "I'm trying to figure out what I want." "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent 8 years knowing exactly what I had to do every month. I knew the transfer amount and the transfer date and what the crisis was going to be. I never had to decide anything because the obligation made the decisions." I looked at my wine. "I don't know what I want from my own life. I've been too busy managing theirs to ask." He was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like the right problem to have," he said. "Now, Yes, I said. Now, I accepted the promotion I had been offered 2 months earlier. Senior analyst, a real scope increase, a team of 4, a salary that made the arithmetic of my ordinary life something other than a monthly subtraction. I took it and felt something I could not name immediately. Not relief, exactly, though relief was part of it. Something more like the specific feeling of standing in a room you have earned the right to stand in and understanding, for the first time, that the right was always yours. I started looking at apartments in March. Not urgently, with the pleasure of someone choosing rather than someone fleeing. I had accumulated $42,000 by then, the product of 8 months of not transferring $3,000 to anyone, and the number had a quality that I returned to sometimes just to verify it was real. $42,000, growing in an account with my name on it, destined for nothing other than what I decided. The apartment I found in April was a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building on the east side, with windows that faced the Willamette and a kitchen that was not large but was good. The right light, the right proportion, the sense of a space designed for someone who actually cooked rather than someone who needed a place to stand while reheating things. I stood in it on a Thursday afternoon with the property manager and looked at the river light through the window and thought about the studio I had been living in for 8 years and the careful, accumulated sadness of a life lived at minimum. And I said I'll take it before she had finished the sentence. My Aunt Carol called in April. She had been at Thanksgiving, had been in the room for all of it, had received the documents as they circulated, had been one of the people who had hugged me on the way out. She called on a Tuesday evening and talked for an hour about things that were not the obvious subject before she finally said, "I want you to know that I believed them. For years, every story your mother told. I believed it because I wanted to believe it, and I didn't ask questions because asking questions would have meant admitting I had been wrong not to ask sooner." A pause. "I'm asking now. How are you, really?" We talked for another hour. I told her the real version of 8 years. Not the dramatic version, not the legal version, but the ordinary version. The ramen and the expired vacation days, and the date I had been on 14 months ago who had disappeared after I asked to split a $40 check. The retirement account that was a decade behind. The promotions I had declined to avoid disruption. "You're going to be all right," she said when I had finished. "I know," I said. "I already am. That's what I keep having to explain to people, that I'm not broken. I'm angry, and I'm grieving something, and I'm also completely fine. You can be all of those things at once." "Yes," she said. "You can." She had her own version of my mother that she was working through, the sister she had known for 60 years, the specific grief of understanding someone you love as something other than you believed. We talked about that too, carefully, the way you talk about things that are painful and shared. I told her I was glad she called. "I should have called sooner," she said. "You called now," I said. "That's the part I'm counting." I thought about Sienna less than I expected to. Not from coldness, from the specific decision, made somewhere in the middle of the evidence building, that her choices were hers in a way my parents were not. She was an adult who had made choices with full knowledge of whose name was on the cards. The grief of losing my sister was real, and I held it without performing it, which was the thing I was learning to do with all the parts of this that were genuinely painful. Hold them without performing them, let them be what they were rather than what the situation seemed to require. She called once, in March. I did not answer. I did not block her either, which felt like the honest middle ground of where I actually was, not ready and not closed. The phone rang, I watched it ring, I did not pick up. That was accurate. In November, a year after the photograph, I went to Oriole. I want to be precise about why, because the easy version of it is symbolic, the daughter reclaiming the restaurant, the act of presence that marks an ending. And while there was something of that in it, the real reason was simpler. I had been walking past Oriole for years and looking through the window, and I had $42,000 in savings and a 1-bedroom apartment with a river view and a job that paid me what I was worth, and I wanted a good meal. James came. We got the table by the window and ordered without looking at prices, the way people look without looking at prices. Aware and choosing not to be governed by the awareness. The food was exceptional in the way of places that have decided that the specific quality of an ingredient is worth the specific cost of sourcing it. We ate slowly and talked about things that were interesting to us, and at no point discussed the fraudulent charge from 12 months earlier that had started everything. I paid with my own card. The name on it was mine. In the car afterward, James said, "How was that?" "The food was extraordinary," I said. "Not what I meant." "I know." I looked at the street through the windshield, the November city, the particular quality of that month's light, which was different from October's and different from December's, and which I had been paying attention to for the first time this year, the way you pay attention to things when you have enough room to notice them. "It was just dinner," I said. "It was just a very good dinner at a restaurant I had been walking past for years. That's enough." He nodded. "Yeah," he said, "that's enough." The restitution payments began arriving in December, administered through the court. Diane had been precise about what to expect: the amounts, the schedule, the specific legal mechanism. And the first payment arrived on a Tuesday morning and sat in my account with the particular weight of money that has traveled a long way to get to where it belongs. I did not spend it immediately. I looked at it for a few days, and then I transferred a portion to my retirement account and put the rest into savings and went to work. At work, I had a team of 4 analysts and a plant in the corner of my office and a window that faced east, and caught the morning light in a way that made the first hour of every workday feel like it had been designed to be good. My team was competent and genuinely interesting, which I had not expected to value as much as I did. The pleasure of working alongside people who were as precise about their craft as I was about mine, who argued about methodology with the enthusiasm of people who found the arguments worth having. I had started cooking on weekends. Not the quick functional meals of someone managing a constraint, but the longer projects. The dishes that required a Saturday afternoon. The things I had been meaning to make for years and had never had the time or the surplus or the headspace to actually attempt. I made mistakes and tried again, and the trying again part did not feel like failure, which was new. James came for dinner on the last Sunday of November, bringing wine he had thought about rather than simply bought. And we ate at the table I had set properly for the first time since I moved in and talked for 3 hours about things that were entirely unrelated to the year that had just happened, which was exactly what the year had been building toward. My father wrote a letter in December. Not an email, an actual letter in an envelope in his handwriting, which I recognized immediately because it was the handwriting of birthday cards and the occasional note left on the kitchen table of the house I grew up in. I held it for a while before opening it, not afraid of it, just taking the full measure of the moment, the way I had been learning to take the full measure of things rather than moving through them too quickly. He wrote about the pension. He wrote about the Tuesday evening 8 years ago, his version of it, what he had understood at the time, and what he had chosen to do with what he understood, the specific sequence of small decisions that had accumulated into the shape of what had happened. He wrote about what cowardice had cost, not himself, but me. He wrote that he did not expect a response and did not need one and was not writing to receive anything. He was writing because it was true and she deserved to have it written. He was serving his sentence at a minimum security facility 3 hours from Portland. I did not know yet whether I would visit. That was a question I was holding rather than answering, which was the right place for it. I put the letter in the drawer of my desk and went to make tea and stood at the east window while the kettle heated and looked at the street below. November, almost December now. The particular quality of the light doing what it always did at this hour, low and deliberate, making ordinary things look worth attention. I had been a financial analyst who could not follow her own advice. This was still technically true. My retirement account was still a decade behind where it should have been, and my credit score was recovering rather than recovered, and the specific arithmetic of 8 years was not going to be undone by 12 months of restitution payments. The math of it would take years to fully correct. But I had known, even when I was writing those articles about compound interest and the cost of delay, that the mathematics of a life was not only about money. It was about what you allowed yourself to want, what you allowed yourself to have, whether you understood your own worth as something that existed independent of your usefulness to other people, independent of the monthly transfer, the next crisis, the practiced break in your mother's voice. I was 32 years old. I had an east-facing window and a one-bedroom apartment and a team of 4 people I respected and $42,000 in savings, and a retirement account that was beginning, slowly, to look like something. I had James, who had sat with me until 2 in the morning when the world rearranged itself and had not made it into a story he was part of. I had Aunt Carol, who called on Tuesdays. I had the long cooking projects on weekends, and the novel I was reading slowly because I could, and the restaurant I had been walking past for years and had finally walked into. The kettle boiled. I poured the water and held the mug in both hands and stood at the window a little longer in no particular hurry, watching the street below go about its ordinary November business. The delivery truck, the woman with the dog, the man from the coffee place on the corner carrying something to someone who had been waiting for it. All of it continuing, ordinary and specific and entirely mine.